streets back into our control. We are pleased that now you have given our streets back to our control and you are now dealing with the criminals and the gangs and what have you. And what that means is more gangs are going to be arrested, gangsters are going to be arrested. We are going to make sure that they get prosecuted. We are going to make sure that they get convicted, and we are going to make sure that they go to jail. Now, having set up the anti-gang unit, have a little faith. Have a little faith as you get involved in your prayers that this is a solution that is going to lead us forward. Now, with this
platforming with multiple stakeholders like ourselves, the World Bank, IFC, Afri-Exim, and several other African finance institutions are there to essentially de-risk projects. I think that's very, very important. And the third part, of course, is at the end of the day, investments have to grow somewhere. They have to land in a place and they have to grow. So the governments are very critical. So we're bringing together the private sector, the investors, and the governments, and of course the rest of us to help to de-risk and make sure things work. So we're ready to go.
All right, so I'd like you to speak to how you plan to bridge that gap between the available capital, globally and even locally, with the bankable projects.
Well, if you take a look at the amount of infrastructure gap that Africa itself has, we did an own estimate at the African Development Bank is anything between $68 billion to $108 billion a year. Well, I'm not scared of those numbers because I know that the money is out there. Let me tell you why. First and foremost, take the whole issue of the global pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. Okay, you have total assets under management today of roughly $56 trillion, right? And for us at the African Development Bank, if we're talking about spending $170 billion a year, that's just 0.32% of the total assets under management of the global pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. So we want to make sure that we actually can tap into that, and that's one of the things that we are doing. Secondly, is that charity must begin at home. Africa itself has pension funds and sovereign wealth funds of total right now of roughly about $622 billion. And so which means we can probably take about 26, 27% of that, and then we can close a lot of this infrastructure gap. We can't keep talking about it. So the point I'm trying to make is that foreign direct investments is important. Domestic capital formation, leveraging the capital markets is very, very important. And to do that is exactly why you need this platform, which is a platform to allow investments to land in a very smooth way that you can de-risk it and therefore make those that will not probably want to invest in Africa invest by landing their investment on a smooth landing strip.
So the world is a very uncertain and scary place, unfortunately, at the moment. There is a reason there's a lot of money sitting in capital funds, not doing very much at the moment. How are you going to convince people to start putting this capital out after so many difficult years?
Well, first and foremost is we've got to change the image, the perception of Africa. This is as much as about changing the perception as much as you create an investment. For too long, Africa is seen as a development destination. I don't want Africa to be seen as a development destination. I want Africa to be seen as an investment destination. That's the lenses with which we look at the continent must be different. And I don't think Africa should beg for development. I think if we invest properly, if we have to do the right things in terms of right projects, good policies, good regulatory environment, the investors quite naturally will come. If you take, Chris, at the issue of energy, the amount of energy deficit that Africa has today, will require investing about roughly another $30 billion a year. Okay, but that's how you look at it, whether the cup is half full or half empty. I see it as half full. So which means that you should turn it into a $30 billion annual investment opportunity that people will have for renewable energy, for whether it is hydro, whether it's solar and things like that. So since the deficits are quite high in Africa, it means that the rate of return on investments are actually quite higher in Africa than anywhere else. So the critical thing to your point is how do you therefore attract the capital, make it patient capital that can stand in Africa, and give the comfort for investors to be in Africa. That's what we are really trying to do with this Africa Investment Forum. I want us to be able to create, it's like planting seed. You plant the seed, you dig up the hole and you put the fertilizer there. You want to make sure the plant grows and you get watered. That's why we are doing this Africa Investment Forum. It's not an event, it's a platform that's going to be a permanent platform in which investors can have the confidence they can bring their investments and make sure it's be landing smoothly. I emphasize again, in Africa.
All right, then I'd like to look at the pipeline of projects that you have, in this forum, and what priority areas are you looking at?
Well, obviously we're going to look at areas that Africa's priorities are going to be. For the $208.8 billion of pipeline of projects that have been prepared, they're actually in infrastructure. You look at transport and utilities. There's quite a significant part of them there. Agriculture, of course, I'm big on agriculture for Africa, food and ag business for Africa. It's there. But we also have manufacturing. It's a very good component of that. These are the major areas. Energy, of course, I must say, top on it, really top on it. These are the areas in which you see most of the transactions.
So when you talked about planting seeds there, I thought there speaks a former Minister of Agriculture. But in planting these seeds, you say you're going to de-risk investments for people. It sounds a brilliant idea, but surely it's not going to be that easy, is it, at these difficult times?
Well, what we've done that's very unique is the fact that, for us as a multilateral development finance institution, we do risk all the time. The world is not, people shouldn't say, I can't invest because of risk. Well, look, the very fact that you walk across the street is a risk. You drive a car is a risk. We all take risk every single day. It's about your risk return that actually matters. And so what we're trying to do is that let's have the projects that clearly show what the high returns will be. What are the risk profiles that you're looking at as investors? What part of that is actually real risks, measurable, tangible risk? What part of that is perceived risk, in which people say if something blows up in one country, I think 54 countries are blowing up in Africa. So we've got to be able to segment those. But we have the instruments. The bank, the African Development Bank, we have partial risk guarantee instruments that we use all the time to support investments in which the government may not meet its own obligation to private sector. We also have partial credit guarantee instruments that allows us to have private sector to private sector transactions in which, the counterparties have to make sure their obligations are not met, somebody pays for it. We use this instrument so well, and we leverage so much from this instrument. So what is unique now is that the African Development Bank and the other partners, we're now saying, okay, let's pull all our instruments together. Is it market risk? Is it financial risk? Is it project risk? Is it political risk? We can pull all, mutualize, if you wish, a risk-sharing instrument and scale so that we can de-risk projects at scale. It's the first time, I must say, Chris, that this is happening in any part of the world. We have ourselves, we have the World Bank, we have the International Finance Corporation, we have the European Investment Bank, European Development, EBRD. We also have Afri-Exim Bank, we have Africa 50, we have DBSA, we have, all the big players, and we all come in together and say, well, look, let's just deliver as one by mutualizing our instruments to be able to advance transactions in Africa. That's what we're there for.
All right, then I'd like you to speak to how, the African Investment Forum is going to tie in with the high-five strategy of the African Development Bank, especially with this year's theme from the annual meetings, which is accelerating Africa's industrialization.
Yeah, absolutely. I get quite concerned about industrialization on the continent because the share of manufacturing GDP has been going down. I think Africa is actually deindustrializing because it is not addressing some of the structural issues. Some of those big issues still are the same. It's still energy. So, as I mentioned to you, a lot of the transactions will be on energy, will be also on infrastructure, which is actually much badly needed. If you're going to be doing the Continental Free Trade Area, hopefully everybody's going to sign on to it and so on. It's going to change, a game changer for the continent. But you need infrastructure, you need ports, you need rails, you need transnational highways to connect. So a lot of the transactions we're really talking about are the things that will advance the high-five agenda strategy of the bank. I just think that the time has come for us to think differently. Countries, yes, can go to the market, and many of them Eurobonds, and that's fine. We can talk about the yields they get and all of those things. But I think that we've got to start looking at how do we get these institutional investors, these pools of money, to be able to help to advance these critical areas.
So going back to your promise when you came up with the idea of this conference, deals, deals, deals. I just want to say I've covered scores of these conferences up and down the continent, and often tangible results can be hard to find. What are you going to do differently at this conference to try to get people sitting down with a pen in one hand and a contract in the other? What are you going to try and do?
You know, what we've done is, this is not a show and tell event. This is because to actually do projects, you got to be serious with it. We've been working on this for the last several months, developing pipelines of projects that are standardized. We've developed, digitized way of connecting the investors and with the project promoters, and to the stage where they can carry these things into the boardroom conversations. And what is so unique about it is that, suppose you and I sign a contract today and say we're going to do this. What if the policy environment changes in the country, right? And so what happens? And so we're looking at the full transaction chain, and we're having in the same boardroom heads of state of the countries that are concerned to say, well, look, we're concerned about 1, 2, 3, 4. If you kick those things out of the table, this will actually happen. So I think we are very advanced in many of these things, and I'm delighted that we can provide the opportunity and the avenue for this to go on. And I must also add that one thing we are doing also is that many of these things got to be actually very transparent. The fact that we are leading this, brings a lot of transparency, accountability, right? Fairness to the deal, so that you're not signing up something that you shouldn't be signing up. Get smart. And so we bring our own knowledge to that to make sure that the countries and the private sector are actually having a symmetrical conversation on deals, not an asymmetric conversation on deals.
All right, so as things kick off tomorrow, I would like to know for you what you think are the exciting highlights people should look out for.
Well, I think first and foremost is that you will find a platform in which our heads of state are interacting almost like CEOs, and that is an exciting thing to have in this boardroom conversation. Secondly, is that you see a lot of very serious conversations, investment conversation around projects and deals that have been prepared over a reasonably good period of time that are, you can move from rare to, medium to well done. I like my steak well done. So some of them are really going to be well done, and then they'll be ready to hit the ground going. And so I'm very excited about it. I think everybody's here from around the world, and so I think it's going to be quite exciting.
Well, Mr. Adesina, before we end this interview, we're going to ask you to nail your colours to the mast and say what your target is. But before we get there, what kind of signals have you had ahead of this conference from the foreign investment community that they're prepared to come and put their money where their mouth is?
Well, I think when we started, we were not sure how many were going to show up. We are oversubscribed. All the boardroom investment conversations globally are oversubscribed. Unfortunately, we have to, not all the people that can attend can actually be in those boardroom conversations. We have had, almost 365 investors that are going to be in this boardroom conversations. 92% of those boardroom conversations are oversubscribed. And so that tells you what the interest is. And what I think this platform really offers is that we offer an intermediation. We drastically cut down the search cost for people looking for bankable deal. We actually also help to standardize things, so it's easier for you to have those conversations. Those things you never used to have in Africa, and that's our role. Our role is to always make sure that the right things are done. They are done in an environment that could make investments to thrive. I actually firmly believe I'm not asking for aid, right, for Africa. I'm actually asking for investments, and I think for investments, capital doesn't like to be made nervous. And so we just have to make sure we do the right things to attract the investments to Africa. I'm confident that we can get that.
All right, I'll go back to the sectors again. I want to look at power. By how much do you think this forum will help solve the challenges for power in Africa?
I think significantly. I think, we've got my guy, my vice president, Amadou Hart, is doing a fantastic job in that, if you take the case of South Africa, where we are here, from the perspective of the African Development Bank, we're going to be investing an additional $1.3 billion over the next 2 years in South Africa. Most of that, of course, will go to our board. Most of that is going to be in the energy sector. If you take the Medupi project, power project, which we want to help to advance, we've already invested a couple of billions of dollars in the Medupi project. It's 2,638 megawatts. But we think that we need to help Medupi to retrofit some of the technologies to be more compliant with the environmental issues that we face, because they're in that area. We are also going to be investing quite a lot in transmission. Our board of directors just approved in September a total of $218 million to help ESCOM with its expansion of its transmission line. And so all across Africa, whether it's solar whether it is hydro, we're going to do that. And by the way, big issue we're working on right now is on solar. We're working on something called desert to power.
Okay.
Now, desert to power, it's a big effort we're doing to light up the entire Sahel through the power of the sun, right? It's going to be a total of 10,000 megawatts. It's going to be the world's largest solar zone, right? And so we started already in Burkina Faso with the Ingelnet, with the Agence Française de Développement, which is 50 megawatts. We're going to build that continuously. This is going to be one of those transformative energy projects. You know, Africa cannot develop in the dark. We've got to fast track everything that has to do with energy. And I don't believe, by the way, in incremental energy. I believe in transformative energy.
What about going back to Nigeria, the land of your birth? Many years, well, not too long ago, a decade ago, the country was suffering from what could be politely said as a paucity of energy and electricity. What's the AFB done there to try to drive one of the biggest economy, or the biggest economy on this continent?
Yeah, you know, I mean, my own perspective in everything that I do absolutely is that my philosophy of development is simple. If I'm not ashamed of something, I don't change it. Yeah, but if I'm ashamed of something, I'll change it. I don't think it's acceptable that Nigeria is hovering in 4,500 megawatt space. No, Nigeria ought to be in 40,000 megawatt space. That's what we should be talking about. I think that we as a bank are strongly supportive. We've been investing in Nigeria for quite some time. We've been working with the Minister of Power right now. We're working with them on the transmission company of Nigeria, in which we've invested over $200 million to help to improve the transmission line. We supported Nigerian bulk electricity trader company because they have the issues in terms of the liquidity challenges. We provided about $200 million to help them to unblock some of those things. We are also going to be investing in solar with the Minister of Power. We are looking at something in the Jigawa area, which is going to be about 1,000 megawatts of solar that we are investing in. We are also investing in other types of renewable energy projects at small scale. You know, and by the way, you know, as Chris, I also chair the board of Africa 50. Africa 50 is a private equity fund that is investing heavily right now in Nigeria in the energy sector. So all across the space on energy, we're going to continue to invest a lot more in Nigeria.
For me, I'd like to look at the G20 Compact with Africa. It's one of the highlights that I'm actually looking forward to. And I'd like to know what that means for you and what to look out for.
The G20 for Africa is a great initiative. I highly commend Chancellor Merkel. She's gold. You know, her name, as far as I'm concerned, is written in gold in Africa when it comes to development. You know, I was with Chancellor Merkel, with President Ramaphosa, and other heads of state in Berlin just last week. The Compact with Africa operates on a basic principle: get your house in order, and your guests come in. Right? If the investment environment is clean, investors will come in, and I can tell you, it's working. You know, the Compact with Africa countries, if you look at them, over the last, from 2015 till now, they have made significant progress on the business, investment, regulatory environment. A total of the policies they said they're going to change regulations, 101 commitments that they made. 98 of those commitments are well on track. That is remarkable, right? And you have them since 2015, they've attracted about $150 billion of investments. I was in Berlin and I saw new investment in power, in other infrastructure in the countries, including South Africa, by the way, you know, that are doing the right thing. So the thing I want to say that excites me with Compact with Africa is that reforms take time. Reforms are hard. That's why most people don't like to do them. It's like pulling teeth. But when reforms work, the benefits can be tremendous. And I think that's what you have with the Compact with Africa. And for this Africa Investment Forum, there's actually a big session that we've organized with G20 and with the European Union on the Compact with Africa, with several ministers coming all across from Europe to advance private sector investments in Compact with Africa countries.
And what about, we've talked a lot about investors here, what about the political will? I mean, you need political will, you need the leaders of this continent behind you to open up to the investment of the world. How concerned or otherwise are you about the leaders of this continent following your lead, shall we say?
You know, I think that our leaders are doing the right things. I am proud of Africa. I'm proud of the fact that over the last, if you look at it, 2016 till now, Africa leads the world in terms of opening up for business. 85 of the reforms that are done globally were actually done in Africa. So that's a very good thing. I was also there in Berlin, and it was quite interesting, that conversation with Chancellor Merkel, and she was talking to the African heads of state, and Chancellor Merkel, German Chancellor, said, well, you know, if this conversation was happening 10, 15 years ago, it'd be very different from what we're having today with the leaders around the table. And I remember one of the African presidents saying, well, yeah, that's because our focus is on investment. You know, we want to really get our countries well aligned for investment. I think what you have across African countries is that Africa is so much in a hurry for development. And we recognize that governments alone are never going to do the job, right? You need the private sector. We need to open up the private sector. We need to also make sure that we have strong macroeconomics policy that makes sure that our economies are stable, make sure that people can invest in those economies, and that there is policy consistency, policy stability. You know, a government comes in today, government will come in tomorrow. That's how the world is. But it doesn't mean investors don't invest in tranches like that. They invest long term. Aliko Dangote said something that I really admire. You know, he said, if you are in a hurry, don't invest in Africa. He said, but if you want to be with patient capital, invest in Africa, because those that don't invest in Africa eventually are going to regret they did it, because this is the place to invest in. So, but it just means also that our leaders are committed to freeing up the space, you know, making sure the regulations do not preclude investors, and that we open up to also support Africa to Africa investment. It's not always just foreign direct investment. You know, it is Africa to Africa investment. And by the way, I am thrilled with some of the things I'm seeing, but I want to see greater volume. If you check out the numbers between 2006 and 2016, 2006, intra-Africa investment was only $2 billion. In 2016, it was $10 billion. This year, it's $12 billion. We want that to grow. But more exciting is companies like Dangote, Standard Chartered Bank, you have the CL companies, you have all these multinational African companies that are now investing across the border, right? Just in 2006 to 2010, the number of mergers, cross-border mergers, has increased to 418. So that tells you that Africans are believing in themselves, they are believing in their economies. We just have to continue to open up. And I think like roses have thorns, but everybody loves roses. Don't focus on the thorns. Just keep focusing on the fact that roses keep opening up.
Okay. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but there's a question that both Kenneth and I want to ask you badly. Yeah. What's your target in your mind, in your planning for this conference in terms of dollars and cents?
Well, you know, our target, as I say, you know, you eat your food in chunks, right? You know, so you can digest them. You know, we've broken down the $208.8 billion that we have on the platform into chunks. This conversation, boardroom conversations this year, is going to focus exclusively on the $40.4 billion of transactions that we have on the table. You know, sleeves rolled up, that's what we're working on.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time and insights, and best of luck over the next few days. Yeah. Fred, that's where we're going to leave it on this special broadcast. Thanks to our guest, Akinwumi Adesina, the President of the African Development Bank, for joining us. We'll bring you a series of live events from the forum in the next 3 days. Keep watching CNBC Africa. We're first in business worldwide.
Welcome all of you. Blockchain applications are almost limitless.
Africa Master Blockchain Company is launching the new Africa Union Coin, a cryptocurrency accessible to each and every African, specifically designed for the needs of Africa. Why yet another cryptocurrency, you may well ask, and what sets the Africa Union Coin apart? For answers to this and more, tune into this CNBC Africa special on 12 November at 1:30 Central African Time, only on CNBC Africa.
CNBC Africa. Beyond oil and gas, Nigeria looks to attract and keep investors within its economy. The Oil and Gas Free Zones Authority brings you conversations on strategies to ensure investors come and stay in Nigeria. Watch OGFZA in Focus every first and last Thursday of the month, showing on CNBC Africa.
Get an internationally recognized qualification through the ABN Training Institute. With our international partners, we offer world-class executive education programs that range from recognition of prior learning to executive masterclasses, as well as bespoke leadership and management courses to suit your organizational needs. Advance your career today.
Right now, down by 3.4%. The Labor Department will be out with its
Africans will create Africa's solutions. Oluyinka Olutoye, Juliana Rotich, Bennett Omalu, Irene Koki-Mutungi. The list is endless. When you hear these names, you can feel Africa's special brand of excellence and the sheer resilience of our people to solve problems. But what are we doing to create the next generation of science and technology trailblazers?
We decided at InterSwitch that if we could get youths to take an interest in STEM, in science, in technology, engineering, and mathematics, perhaps we could assist them with the kind of critical reasoning, the analytical abilities that are required to solve the numerous challenges of Africa. And this is what has led InterSwitch to InterSwitch Spark.
InterSwitch Spark, an InterSwitch Switch a Future initiative.
It's morning in Africa. It won't be bright for another hour or two, but the continent is already on the move. Trade is picking up, and spirits are high as the continent prepares to move yet another 1 million tons of goods to markets across the seas. It's the hour for making tea and coffee, of cotton bales, splitting wood, diamonds in metal boxes, and tall, tall buildings going up. The train engines are revving up, factories are opening, and big undersea cables are pushing the continent alive. 4 time zones, 1 million opportunities, and vibrant young professionals 100 million strong. It's morning in Africa, and one bank is opening the door to endless opportunities. With seamless Pan-African payment and trade solutions and presence in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, we are Africa's gateway to the world. Access Bank. Speed, service, security.
Join global leaders at the Africa 2017 Forum, the most important business summit in Africa, where the most prominent CEOs and investors will convene with policymakers. Hear firsthand from heads of state and the continent's foremost experts. Meet the fastest growing startups and the most promising young entrepreneurs. Join us from the 7th to the 9th December in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Africa 2017 Forum. Business for Africa and the world.
A very warm welcome to Closing Bell West Africa. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Esther Awuni. In the next half hour, Nigeria's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Emmanuel Kachiku, speaks on the opportunities presented by the divestment of international oil companies from the country. Then we'll discuss expectations from the African Investment Forum set to take place in Johannesburg, South Africa. And later on, we'll discuss the highlights of today's trade on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. As always, you can follow all our conversations. Just send tweets to @CNBC Africa. You can also send tweets to my Twitter handle too, @Esther O Awuni. The closing bell West Africa hashtag is CBWA410. Let's kick off now with some top headlines from West Africa. Several students have been kidnapped in northwestern Cameroon. Authorities say that 79 students and 3 adults were kidnapped in the early hours of Monday morning at the Presbyterian Secondary School in Bamenda. Now, confirming the incident, government spokesman Issa Chiroma Bakri said between 4 and 5 a.m. the kidnappers attacked on the outskirts of Bamenda. In the secondary school, taking 79 students, their principal, a security guard, and a driver. Bakri went to say that the separatists are behind this act. And Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission says it has removed over 300,000 names from its voter register as the commission steps up preparations for the 2019 general elections. The commission also revealed that it would display the voter register in the 120,000 polling units nationwide for scrutiny for today, from today to the 12th of November. INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu disclosed this when he received a delegation of ECOWAS pre-election fact-finding mission led by the chairman of Sierra Leone's National Electoral Commission, Mohamed Conte, in Abuja. Those are top headlines from West Africa at this hour. Now, the African Development Bank's Africa Investment Forum is designed to elicit more action beyond talks, as investors and stakeholders will be looking at streamlined, bankable projects and making immediate decisions. That's according to Mahosi Lekete, an executive director and member of the board of the AFDB, representing South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, and others. Take a look.
AIF is about stopping the talking. I think we've done enough talking about investments on the continent not coming, the reasons why they're not coming. It's about the action. We are expecting that whatever obstacles, be they finance, be they regulatory, be they unprepared projects, all of that, this forum gives us the opportunity to unpack that. And as the African Development Bank, we have been able, through our partnerships, to bring the stakeholders under one roof to talk about these issues.
Now, much of the conversations that we have heard, even leading up to today, has been on the focus of what you just mentioned, working the work as opposed to talking the talk. Now, my worry is you sit on the board for the AFDB. What strategies have been put in place to ensure that this coming few days are not just another series of conversations like we have seen from time to time? What strategies, what deliberate measures have the AFDB taken to ensure that we actually do get results from the next few days of events?
So if you look at the African Development Bank 5 priority areas, they are really centered around those issues that are center stage for our countries, for investors. And they range from energy to transportation to agriculture. Those are the areas that we really need to focus on if we are to increase the growth of our economies. So as the African Development Bank, we are not only bringing in money on the table as the bank, but we are also partnering with other MDBs. We're bringing in partners like the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We are bringing in our own Africa 50. We are bringing in the Development Bank of South Africa, such institutions who are here to say we can co-finance with you to ensure that we put the money on the table. But that's not only what we're bringing in. We're only bringing in the policy makers. We're saying, you know, all the barriers to investments have been spoken about. Come to the table, face investors, and say to them, how are you addressing this? Because really, this is what is keeping the money from flowing into our economies. So we're bringing in the policy makers, we're bringing in our own money, but we're also bringing in investors and partners to make this work.
So it's a round table, the AFDB, investors and policy makers. Now, the bane of conversations would also focus on trying to de-risk investments. I'm very sure that will be that would constitute a major part of conversations that we will see over the next few days. Now, de-risking, the perception of risk in Africa is very worrisome, as we have spoken about earlier on. much of what is the reality is not as much as the perception of risk in Africa. Talk us through some of the de-risking strategies that the AFDB will be putting on the table to facilitate transactions.
So the biggest risk that we have is policy uncertainty. You may not think about it because it's not financial, but that is the biggest risk. So having our leaders, having our ministers and other policymakers in the room to talk about what exactly they are doing in their countries to ensure that the policy environment is conducive for investment. It's a very big de-risker in my view, other than the financial part. But as the African Development Bank, what we are bringing, as I said, some of the multilateral development banks that are here, we have already signed MOUs for co-financing projects. We, as the African Development Bank, on the other hand, we also have the guarantee, the credit guarantee framework that we use as a de-risking mechanism, and we are looking forward to bringing other multilateral development bank into building one large platform that can be used to de-risk projects to basically support what we are doing as the African Development Bank.
So the AFDB has delineated all options under 4 work streams, which covers pipelines, policies, projects, credit enhancement, bankability, as well as institutional investors and all that. Now, much of all this sounds like it will be focusing on the blue chip companies, the big investors. What plans or how does the AFDB hope to bring in the MSMEs, which are actually the engine room of the economies?
Yes, I've heard it today in this room that SMEs are very important to our economies, and I agree with that. While it may not necessarily be clear from the 4 priority areas that you have mentioned, the African Development Bank is very much in support of SMEs, and we do this through our other programs that we run in partnership with some of our partners. So SME development is very much key and important for our economies because, as you know, it actually constitutes a large portion of business on the continent. But don't underestimate the importance of dealing with the soft and hard infrastructure, because that is what is going to unlock and make it easy for SMEs to succeed on the continent.
Talk us through your expectations over the next 5 days.
Well, what I'm expecting and what I hope is that through the sessions that will run with investors and our policymakers, that some of the hurdles will be unlocked and that we will get some of the big projects that have been spoken about across the continent announced or signed off. That for me will be the biggest highlight to see, even if it's not a check, but saying we have unlocked this challenges to this specific sector or this specific project, and in the next 10 to 12 months we expect to see this project rolling. By the way, as we said, the Africa Investment Forum, this is the inaugural meeting, but we are expecting that work doesn't stop. It actually starts here, and that this attracts and brings us together to ensure that in the future we can even have much more commendable things to present and to announce.
Mahershile Ketian, Executive Director and Member of the Board of the AFDB, representing South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, and others. When we come back, Andrew Sacco, trader at Capital Care Trust, will join us for a market wrap for today's trading at the equities market here in Nigeria. Join us again after the break.
There's no city in the world like it. That's why it had to be Lagos. Here, culture, art, and life collide at a place called ArtX Lagos, a critical access point to the most significant art happening now in Africa and the diaspora, generating an entirely new cultural experience. Lagos is the destination, art is the celebration, and ArtX Lagos is where they meet. Welcome to a new age of culture in Lagos.
From the 7th to 9th of November 2018, the African Development Bank will co-host the Africa Investment Forum. This is an innovative global event bringing together pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, private investors, policymakers, private equity firms and heads of government. The Africa Investment Forum is a co-guarantee and co-financing platform to accelerate investment in Africa's sectors. The Africa Investment Forum, November 7th to 9th, Johannesburg, South Africa. Register now.
Hi, my name is Ada and I'm your go-to girl. I'm fluent in English and Pidgin, and I am learning a few basic words in Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. Think that's cool? Wait till you hear one of my jokes. You can chat with me on Facebook Messenger with the handle by Diamond Ada. I can help you open a bank account, buy airtime, transfer money, pay bills, buy movie tickets, apply for a loan, check football updates, check stock prices, weather forecast, and lots more. I am your go-to girl when you need to carry out simple everyday banking and non-banking transactions. You should pay for my services. But hey, what are friends for? So, look for me on Facebook Messenger and chat with me. I'll be waiting. You can also visit www.diamondbank.com or any Diamond Bank branch to know more about me. Diamond, your bank.
Welcome back to Closing Bell West Africa. Over now to the market here in Nigeria. Nigeria's all-share index closed in the green today, up 0.33% at 32,154.03 points. Some of today's best performers include Nestle, up 3.6%, Cement Company of Northern Nigeria, Nigerian Breweries, and Guinness. On the flip side, Flour Mill of Nigeria, GT Bank, and Fitson made up some of today's top laggards. Andrew Saku, trader at Capital Care Trust, joins us from the NSC to share his highlight of today's trading. Andrew, thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
My pleasure, Esther.
So we're seeing the all-share index up today, and it appears to be stuck in this 32,000 point mark. Would you say that this is a new resistance point for the all-share index?
Yeah, well, we may not exactly say so. However, one thing is very clear, that the market has suffered significant plummet in this past, and we're beginning to see some level of support for quite a number of the stocks. So it is expected that the levels that they are now should suffer less diminution in values for across board for most of the stocks. So whether it becomes really a new level or not, the ensuing days will tell. But I think also that some of these prices are refusing to go below the current level. So we might just come to that reach at some point.
Now, the 9-month earnings season has come and gone, but some companies, a couple of companies, are yet to report their earnings. And of course, we did see the NSE move in that regard, suspending 6 of those 6 stocks from trading, but 4 of them have been restored. Just today, Cement Company of Northern Nigeria announced a delay in the filing of its 9-month earnings, attributing that to review occasioned by the recent changes in the company's senior management. And I was just taking a look at today's top gainers, and I see Cement Company of Northern Nigeria on today's gainers list. Could you tell us, do you think that this is investors positioning ahead of the release of this company's results?
I think there are 2 issues to quickly remark about. The fact that, listing on the boards of the exchange is a voluntary action by would-be or listed companies, as it were. Secondly, by such disposition also, listed companies have signed on to complying with minimum standards with respect to filing of returns or reports as one major issue. And increasingly we've come to see that the exchange has heightened the level of zero tolerance in terms of compliance, and it's quick to take very extreme action, so to say. The last thing the exchange wants to do is to put any company on suspension for want of compliance with any of the rules, including the filing of reports. So in the extant situation where the exchange has to take such a decision, it does take. However, talking specifically for Cement Company of Northern Nigeria, I think it's just a coincidence of events that the stock inched up today, even against the backdrop of the news of delay in the filing of reports. And by the way, it is also important to note that one of the things the exchange does is give people or companies, as it were, the latitude of explaining should there be any issues that compel delay. And that is more honorable for any company to do than, to keep quiet about filing where they haven't filed. So usually when you do give notice, which is a reasonable step to take, the exchange factors that into consideration, and such information is available to the market. So the decision by CCNN to inform the market about the delay is certainly a welcome one, and we look forward, hopefully, to that declaration soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew, for your time today. We appreciate it. Andrew Saku, trader at Capital Care Trust. Now, Nigeria's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Emmanuel Kachikwu, says domestic oil companies have been well to the challenges accompanied by the divestment of international oil companies from the country. He discussed the opportunities the divestment presents for indigenous companies and more with CNBC Africa's Gio De Villas. Take a look.
Well, let me start by saying that whenever sanctions are imposed on a member of OPEC, we are usually not very happy. We think consultative and discussing negotiation engagements are the best ways to resolve some of these issues. So we hope somehow both America and Iran will find their way out of the current impasse. But having said that, in terms of its impact, the projection most people have is that with Iran exiting some substantial volume of its supply out to the market because of the sanctions, that you therefore here have a near scarcity, and so it will impact on prices, and prices will jump up. The behavioral dynamics of pricing over the last 3-4 weeks is not replicating that. We'll need to see what happens over the next 1 week. Two things are certain. OPEC does have, some members of OPEC at least does have the capacity to improve on in its production, and so hopefully cover some of that gap. Two, however, is that our ability to cover it in a 100% basis is a bit uncertain. Some of the idle capacities that people rely on do not just come into the production almost immediately. They require investment, they require time, they require resurgence. And so it's not something that you can turn off and turn on almost with the hands of a tap. And so definitely, if depending on how much of an impact the sanctions have on Iran in terms of its production capacity, you may see a bit of effect in the market. If for nothing, the entire entire confidence, at least in the market, will obviously be touched. I do say that because Iran has gone through this before for a very long time. When I visited Iran about 2 years ago, one of the things that impressed me was that they had been able to find a way of relying on local technology to bring up their production. Probably not at the same rate as they would have, obviously. They have also been able to enter into very good relationships with the rest of the European countries, France, Britain, Germany, and so we're able at the time, to find alternatives to the American technology, which was predominant in Iran. This current embargo is a lot more engulfing because it has the financial nexus, it has the technology nexus, it has an export nexus. And so to what extent they'll be able to sort of navigate around that is obviously uncertain. We'd like to see, but the Iranian people are very resilient. I want to believe the impact shouldn't be too dramatic. I also want to believe that the impact in the market shouldn't be too destabilizing. But in the event that it becomes critical, I think OPEC will try and rise to the challenge.
So let's look at divestment of international oil companies from Nigeria. What opportunities does this offer local companies? And
the way we look at sport. Every month we travel the world to preview.
Companies have risen quite a lot to the challenge. Over the last 5-6 years, there's been a lot of divestment from marginal blocks, so non-actually active blocks from the majors. Of course, there is also a program of government in being able to take over idle fields after a certain time when there's no production. It's called the concept of relinquishment. And we've been able to take that, put into the marginal field basket, and reward the marginal field basket largest Nigerian domestic companies. The more bullish ones have gone to the oil companies themselves and negotiated